So, unfortunately, Camila and I cannot speak in Spanish. So, if you are a Spanish speaker, please put your headset on. I know you don't understand if you don't understand English. So, I don't know why I'm saying it. Great. Okay. Bienvenidos a todos y todas. To all of our participants joining us from around the world, we would like to wish you a warm welcome to the 2024 Annual Meeting for Child Protection and Humanitarian Action. My name is Hani Mansourian, and I'm the Director of the Alliance for Child Protection in Humanitarian Action.
Hello everyone and buenos dias. It's a pleasure to be with you all in this beautiful part of the world. My name is Camilla Jones and I'm the Deputy Director of the Alliance.
So, who knows how many annual meetings the Alliance has organized so far? What number are we on? 15, 7, 9, that's correct. So this is the 9th annual meeting under the Alliance. Of course, there was the CPWG before that, who also was doing that annual meeting, so we are continuing that tradition. So the first 4 years were in person, then our beloved COVID hit, and we had to go online. So for 4 years we were online, and this is the first year after 4 years of virtual annual meetings that we are back together. So I wanted to suggest that we cherish that possibility of being together by turning to your neighbor, shaking their hands, giving them a hug, so that we basically appreciate the fact that we are all together.
That was wild at some point. Crazy super spreader guy that you are.
Okay, fantastic. And it's completely fine if you give hugs to more than one person, as long as you don't have COVID.
Okay, so now you've all pressed the flesh. We wanted to also get a sense of who's in the room. So we wanted to first invite those joining us from the Latin America and Caribbean region to just put their hand up and give everyone a wave. Hey, not so many as we had yesterday, but still a very big contingent. And then for the rest of you joining us from other parts of the world, let's see you. A wave, stand up. Oh, you're not so cheerful as the others. So, Hani mentioned the many, many meetings that the Alliance has convened. Some of you might not have attended them before. Some of you might have been at all of them. Either way, feel welcome. We want you all to feel welcome and enjoy and hopefully come again.
So I would like to first thank a few people and entities that helped us organize this. So first, UNICEF Latin America and Caribbean Regional Office, that is our co-host here, who really made this happen and this beautiful venue that we are in. So thank you, UNICEF LACRO. Also our generous donors that have helped us make this happen. US government, particularly PRM, Norway, and ECW. As well as contributions from some of our steering committee members who had helped either the organization of this or bringing of some of our local actors to this venue. So thank you all. And a big thank you to the regional group for Latin America and Caribbean on protection of children and adolescents in emergencies for organizing a really interesting session yesterday. Probably about half of you were in that session yesterday. But there will be a little recap for those who were not there. It was a really interesting session, so thank you to those. And I also want to acknowledge our colleagues that were not able to join us today because of either personal reasons or the sheer capacity that we don't have to host the 500 people who actually registered to join us. So if you're online, welcome.
So our meeting theme reflects the shocking situation that we find ourselves in today. With escalating conflict and crisis posing challenges for children's protection around the globe. This meeting theme was selected as a top priority by over 200 of our members. So we feel that, it's really relevant, it's really current. And it also presents a call to action as to what we might need to do differently in the face of rising needs, restrictions in access, potentially limiting funds, although we'll hear more about that later. So yes, we hope that you find it inspiring, interesting, useful.
So today we will start the day with the voice of a child, as it's appropriate for a meeting like this, a young girl from an indigenous community in Brazil. And we will then move into an opening session that will bring a bit of global perspective, but also a LAC-specific perspective to kickstart this, hopefully, very interesting 3 days of discussion.
And then after this morning, we're going to have a marketplace where you can hear from our technical groups. You'll also be able to hear from the regional group that Hani mentioned, hosted the event yesterday, and the coordination bodies that we have joining us this week. So it will just be held outside. While our technical groups operate in English, they will also be giving you the chance to sign up to mailings in Spanish. And their stands will stay up during the week, so you can return there if you don't get round the full marketplace. Some of them might go there and can arrange to meet you there. So yeah, just take your time and enjoy getting to know their work, getting to know them.
And throughout the 3 days, we will have several plenary sessions like this when you're all together in this room. A couple of them that I would mention, one is on resourcing child protection work, and one is on protection of children on the move, among other very interesting plenary sessions.
On Wednesday evening, we're going to have a networking event off-site. We'll say a little bit more about that at the end of the day today, so you know where you're going to go and how long it's going to take, etc. But we also wanted to start by letting you network, know who's in the room, and maybe find a bilingual friend. So we're going to have a mini networking engagement activity today while the marketplace stallholders set up. And we hope that sets the tone for the week, that you're going to be engaging with each other and sharing.
So in addition to plenary sessions and the networking session mentioned, we will have other types of sessions. There are two kinds of curated sessions that are based on the best and the most relevant abstracts that were submitted. They include sessions that group 2 to 4 presentations, as well as some longer interactive or panel sessions. Just to note that this year we received 88 abstracts, and 40 of them, just below 50%, were selected to be presented at this year's annual meeting.
This year we have a number of child and youth speakers in the room and online, which is fantastic. We have a child safeguarding focal point for the event who's bilingual. Please take note of their contact details, which can be found in the code of engagement sheets, which will be in each room. Of course, if you are an adult experiencing any sexual harassment or abuse, you can also report this way. This is a local person who knows the local system, and any reports will be treated in the strictest confidence.
So we would like to also extend our gratitude to a large number of our colleagues from across the Alliance that are going to be facilitating the sessions this week. So if you're a facilitator, it was nothing. Hopefully. If you're a facilitator, can you raise your hand, please? So as you can see, there's quite a number of people who have been working for months to help us curate and organize this session, the content of this session. So in addition to all the logistics, these people are behind the content. So when you go to their sessions, I really encourage you to go up to them after the session and thank them for all the work that they have put into this.
And for our visual learners and those with diverse language needs, we have an artist with us today, Alex, giving you all a wave. He's going to be doing a live drawing of many of the sessions. So you might want to go and have a little peek over his shoulder. But we'll be using those in our post-event comms. So if you're a facilitator running a session, or if you really loved a session and want to promote it when you get back home, they will be in English. But yeah, please feel free. We'll be sharing those, and I hope you enjoy them. Also at lunch, if you prefer to sit down, you can come back in the room here with your lunch. But we also know some of you are a bit jet lagged, so we wanted to give you the chance to be out there in that beautiful lobby with the natural light. So there are some tables you can stand up and have a standing lunch, also get your steps on your pedometer if you prefer. And there is a free Wi-Fi, it's UNICEF LACRO. Please use that one rather than the other ones listed.
Great. So all the morning sessions, the 3 days that we are together, will be live streamed. So be aware of that and potentially share with your colleagues who were not able to come to tune in to Alliance social media to be able to watch it. But all the other sessions will also be recorded and will be made available in multiple languages after the session. So you will all have access to that through our social media channels. Also, we wanted to make sure that you all take advantage of being in person again and, of course, catch up with your existing colleagues and friends, but also meet new people. That way we ensure that we go out of this place with a larger network of our colleagues, but also for those who may not know many people to feel more at home and welcomed here.
Okay, so that's about it from us for now. We're now going to hear from our fabulous keynote speaker. She will be speaking in Portuguese with English subtitles, so just letting you know in case you need to turn your volume up, put that headset on if you haven't already. I say this because she speaks very fast, and you want to hear what she has to say. So just make sure you've got your tech set up, and in a moment we'll have the video come up. And
welcome.
Welcome.
Olá a todos, meu nome é Thaisa Cambeba. Cambeba não é o meu sobrenome, é o nome de um povo que vive em várias regiões do Brasil e até no Peru. Tenho 13 anos e moro na aldeia Tururucariúca, na Amazônia, Brasil. Neste momento, estou representando crianças de vários países da América do Sul, especialmente aquelas que compartilham a floresta amazônica. Todos sabemos que as mudanças climáticas estão impactando o nosso planeta de maneira alarmante. Os incêndios estão devastados, as florestas estão liberando gases de efeito estufa. No meu estado, a fumaça dos incêndios é tão espessa que mal podemos ver. É terrível, mas parece que quem não vê são aqueles que estão causando esses incêndios. São os que não conseguem ver nada. Eles estão recusando a ver o óbvio. Precisamos discutir o impacto das mudanças climáticas e como ela ameaça nossas vidas e os nossos direitos. Mais uma vez, proteger as crianças anda de mão dadas como proteger o ambiente onde crescemos. Isso é algo que precisamos abordar urgentemente. Precisamos de agir agora. Quer dizer, vocês precisam agir agora. Precisamos do seu compromisso para que isso aconteça. Todos também precisam adotar práticas saudáveis em suas vidas diárias. Todos precisam ser exemplos do que pregam. Nós, povos indígenas e ribeirinhos, já vivemos dessa maneira. E o nosso modo de vida é um convite à esperança. Nosso estilo de vida segue os tempos e os limites da natureza. E vivemos em harmonia com a floresta e protegemos as nossas crianças. Temos muito a ensinar e a compartilhar em um momento em que aprendemos é essencial. Valorizem conhecimentos indígenas e ribeirinhos. Apoiem nossas ações. Entendam nosso modo de vida e nos ajudem a promover o nosso modo de vida saudável e respeituoso com a floresta. Nós protegemos e vivemos na floresta em que todos precisam para sobreviver, a floresta amazônica. Precisamos de ajuda. A minha geração está em perigo. Colaboração é a palavra no momento. E se colaborarmos uns com os outros, podemos trazer esperanças juntos. A próxima conferência ambiental, COP30, será na Amazônia. Talvez, se agirmos agora, quando vocês vierem para o Brasil, possamos celebrar conquistas e não apenas reclamar das consequências. Não precisamos de mais alertas, precisamos de ações. Faça sua parte, colabore e, por favor, não se recuse a agir pelo óbvio. Chito Manito, muito obrigada.
Very powerful. You can change the slides to the other one. Very powerful words from our girl from an indigenous community in Amazon. A huge thanks goes to World Vision for organizing this for this annual meeting, because they have worked with this girl before and they helped us put together this this opening remarks from her, encouraging us to act. And I think that's probably the very clear message that we're getting from this. So whether it is about preserving the environment or it is about protecting children, action is asked for by children. So let's keep that in mind. And also another very positive thing that she mentioned is let's not just complain, but have something to celebrate. Right? So we need to have something to celebrate, hopefully this time, but also next time we meet together. So I'll be inviting our panelists for the first part of the opening session up here. So I'll start with Shima Sengupta, who's the Director of Child Protection for UNICEF. Shima's UNICEF career spans both development and complex humanitarian context. She has been a country representative in Iraq and deputy representative in Afghanistan and Bangladesh, and you all know those contexts. Prior to these, Shima was Chief of Child Protection in Somalia and Ghana. So Shima's UNICEF career spans child protection, but also both development and humanitarian settings. Shima holds a master's degree in clinical psychology and actually has practiced as a psychologist and worked in Calcutta Samaritans prior to joining UNICEF. So Shima will, as representing the host, will open the meeting, and then I'll invite the rest of the panelists up.
Use that?
Sure.
Yes. All right. Technology. Thank you, Hani. I don't know whether I'm really opening the meeting because I think our keynote speaker just did that. That was so powerful. It's a tough act to follow. She was fantastic. And I think what she said resonates with, I saw lots of nods in the room, so I know it resonates with most of us. But what I am going to do is, as a co-host, I'm going to do the formal welcome, I guess. So honestly, I think we heard from Hani and from Camilla, you know, the series of alliance meetings that we've had, you know, and each time when you've had face-to-face ones, what it's meant and how it's evolved. So for us in UNICEF, it's a big honor to be hosting this annual meeting for child protection in Humanitarian Action with the Alliance. It's a big job. I know the Alliance carries this, you know, throughout the year through various humanitarian contexts. So it's really a pleasure. This is the first time, as we heard, since 2019, that this community has come together in person. So of course, we are going to make the most of it. The agenda is exciting and it's critically important given the context of humanitarian needs in the world today. The child protection impacts of exponentially growing conflicts, climate displacement, as we just heard, and migration demand our full attention. So I'm actually very excited by the lineup of sessions, presentations and exchanges for the week. And I'm sure the marketplace is also going to be very exciting for us to learn from each other. It's really an extraordinary opportunity for all of us here to learn from each other, but also to share, because there's so much that we don't always know is happening around the world. So for me, this meeting is particularly exciting because it's held in Latin America, where there has been an outpouring of interest, and case studies have been extraordinary. The Alliance has taken strides to ensure greater accessibility in language and time zones, and this region has responded with contagious enthusiasm. So gracias. I would really like to thank the Alliance Secretariat, the working group and task forces, and Alliance members for the hard work that goes into bringing together an annual meeting of this size and caliber. Everything looks so set and calm and exciting, and everyone's just waiting to see how it unfolds. But I know it's taken a lot of work from a lot of you across time zones. So thank you so much for that. I also take this opportunity to thank the experts, the practitioners, and the members of governments who are presenting and participating in the proceedings, including those joining us online. And that's, I think, in many ways more difficult than it is to be in a room full of people, because you've got to be there and the time zones and all of that. So really appreciate that. For me, attending a conference like this is a pleasure, it's a privilege, and also a responsibility. And I do believe it's the same for many of you, if not all. We have a responsibility to commit ourselves fully to being here, taking back to our respective contexts what we've learned, and to advance the agenda globally. I was saying to Tasha as we walked in that, you know, this is so exciting for me. As you heard from Hani, I started in an NGO many, many years ago in Calcutta, working on the streets with children. And it always excites me to come back and to have the opportunity to learn and share from the practitioners. So my own commitment to you is to redouble my advocacy efforts for children and for child protection practitioners in all these contexts. UNICEF has been a proud co-lead of the Alliance since 2016, and we are glad to see this network flourish as it supports practitioners in the field in their efforts to protect children against all forms of abuse, exploitation, neglect, and violence in humanitarian and fragile contexts. And as we all know, those contexts are increasing. On behalf of UNICEF's regional office and New York headquarters, a big welcome to all of you, and thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Shima, for helping us reopen or double open the meeting. Please take a seat here. So I'll invite the rest of the panelists. So we also have Riyad Al-Najm, who is the co-founder and chief executive director officer of Child Guardians, who many of you know as Huras Network. Riyad was born in 1991, and he discovered his passion for human rights, particularly children's rights, when he volunteered with the Syrian Red Crescent. In addition to being the CEO of Huras Network, Riyad also co-leads the Alliance for Child Protection and Humanitarian Action, and this happened during the past year. So we now have a local organization that actually co-leads the Alliance, and he co-chairs the Localization Advisory Group of the Alliance and the steering committee member of, I can't pronounce the name, Sirsk Svenska of SSDF. And a board member of We Exist, Advocacy Alliance. So Riyad holds a master's degree in business development in NGO settings and mainly focuses on enhancing management modules for nonprofit organizations. Welcome, Riyad. We also would like to welcome Bill Forbes, who is the global lead of child protection and participation for World Vision International. Bill provides strategic leadership to World Vision's efforts to strengthen local prevention and response to abuse, exploitation, and neglect of children, as well as strengthening children's voices and participation in the world's most difficult places. Previously, Bill worked for World Vision in Cambodia for 8 years, providing leadership to the Peace and Justice Program, which included a special focus on peacekeeping and on trafficking and sexual exploitation and abuse of children. Bill has a bachelor's degree and a master's degree in international development. Welcome, Bill. So now that we have our panelists here, I just wanted to take a moment to refresh our memories and test everyone's memories. I'm sure everyone has read the background paper. Is that true? So maybe next slide, please. And one more. Next, please. Yeah. So what percentage, so the one on the left, what percentage increase have we seen in the number of conflicts from 2020 to 2023? 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%, 50%? Anyone? 40%, that's correct. Well done, Eleonora. So 40% increase, that's an insane number. Percentage of children living in conflict zone worldwide has obviously increased, but doubled, tripled, or quadrupled between 1990 and 2019. I heard something from this side? Tripled, yes, that's correct. Next slide, please. One more test of your memory. Oh, the other way, the other way. You're going backwards. Forward, forward, yes. So in 2023, the number of forcibly displaced people globally reached a record high of 114 million, including 43 million children, which is 40%. Now, what percentage of the population is comprised of children globally? So if 40% of those displaced are children, is it 40% of the global population that is children? 30%. So children are significantly overrepresented in displaced populations. Now, the reason I wanted to remind us of all these numbers is that it's interesting that these numbers just become numbers and they lose their significance. I mean, how insane is it that we have 114 million people displaced, 40% children, or the number of conflicts going up by 40%. These are not normal numbers. So I just wanted to remind ourselves that it's part of our job to not allow these to become normalized, that we need to repeat them, not in a way to normalize them, but in a way to really shake each other and ourselves and say, how in the world are we living in a world that has these numbers? So I just wanted to start with that, and then I'll now go to our panelists. Okay, I'll start with Shima. Shima, as you have seen in the background paper and here as well, armed conflict has gone up significantly in the past few years. As we said, 40% more between 2020 and 2023. And also we have seen in the past 2 years, we have seen most conflicts ever since the end of Second World War. And the percentage of children living in conflict has nearly tripled from 1990 to 2019. And approximately 400 million children, 1 in 6, live in conflict-stricken areas. Now, please tell us more about your experience and what UNICEF is seeing on the ground in terms of impact on children and what needs to happen.
Thank you, Hani. It does, we do pause to think, right? As Hani said, it's not just the numbers, but if you actually pause and reflect, it is much more than that. But as you said, Hani, indeed, there are more than 460 million children across the globe who are living or fleeing from conflict zones. And this is a huge number, it's like the number, it's like population of countries. So just imagine that if you have a whole, a huge country full of children just fleeing or living in such conditions. What we have seen, and we know this, and all of you in this room know, so please, I don't mean to preach, but just putting all our experiences together, I think, because UNICEF's experience is UNICEF's, but it's also a sum total of our partners' experiences, right? So in war, as you said, but we also know children are the first ones to suffer, right? And they suffer the most. They lose their family members and friends. They stop going to school. Schools disappear. They're sexually abused, killed, injured. Often there are unexploded ordnances and weapons, and these then, when they're out playing, injure them or kill them. They're recruited and used by armed groups, armed forces. They're multiply displaced many times from many different places. They keep moving. They're at risk of being separated from their families, friends, everything that has always meant so much to them. And the infrastructure that they depend on, schools, medical facilities, water, power plants, even playgrounds, all of those are attacked, destroyed, disappear from their lives. And then when they need it most, humanitarian access to deliver services, it's gone, right? Either it's gone or they can't access it. It's denied. So since 2005, what we've seen is grave violations obviously have been increasing. The UN has verified more than 350,000 grave violation incidents. And now it's much more than ever before in conflict situations. So really, honey, I sound like I'm painting a very depressing picture, but that is the truth, right? But as you said, and as each one of us know, behind each of these numbers is a story of a child and of a family whose lives have been forever changed. Where, even it just doesn't go back to where it was. And my experience, as you heard from Hani in the beginning, I've worked in many of these contexts, and my experience actually mirrors UNICEF's experience. I came into UNICEF being asked to write a mental health and psychosocial strategy for natural disasters, and to work in strengthening justice systems for children. But as you heard, over the course of my career, I've worked in many conflict settings. Sri Lanka, Somalia. Bangladesh was supposed to be peaceful, but then the Rohingya crisis happened. Afghanistan, Iraq, and it just continues. But I've learned from each of these experiences, and really it's about how important it is to look for those entry points. Entry points during the conflict, of course, and after the conflict. And I just came back from Ethiopia 3 days ago, and what struck me is women and children there telling us that they were better during the conflict than after, because there are no resources after the conflict. We don't stick around after the conflict. We in this room don't, because we sometimes don't have the resources to continue. And I think that's very, very important. We need to be there. We need to continue after the conflict to help build back those lives. And more and more, honey, we are seeing challenges to this because of the lack of resources to continue. And I think, to me, that's really worrisome, extremely worrisome, because we are leaving these kids, these women, these communities at a time when they're most fragile. So that's really quite something. UNICEF believes, and so do I, that we must invest in people, and people who are the backbone of this child protection workforce. Our social workers, our community workers, the first responders, basically everybody in this room. right? That's the most important. And often that's what I hear from the communities, that, you know, the banners and the signs of the projects disappear, but there are the community workers who remain behind and continue to support them and find ways to support them. And this is why it's so important for us to invest in people like you in this room here today. We need to find better ways to collaborate, and we just heard our keynote speaker talk about collaboration. We need to learn to engage children and communities in designing the program right from the start. It also means delivering programs that are tailored to local realities. Again, we were reminded of that. Don't tell us, ask us, learn from us. And I think we really have to do that. Learn from local communities, learn from the lessons that we have learned, and share that evidence. Extremely important. Maybe an example, I think when we talk about child reintegration, this is actually a very good example. If we see over the years, UNICEF has supported tens of thousands across all these different conflicts. And these children have exited from armed forces, armed groups, and have been supported to rebuild their lives, be reintegrated into their communities. We've learned many lessons, and some of these actually, the lessons that we've learned from them apply across all other conflict situations and whether it's armed violence or armed conflict. It is more or less the same experiences, because the experiences of the children, whether in an armed conflict or in an armed violence, is more or less the same. Whether the group's objective is criminal or political, often the scale, the intensity, the types of violence, the exploitation that the children face are all the same. Over the course of my career, it feels good to sit here and look at all of you, because someone just asked me at my table, how long have I been with UNICEF and Child Protection? It's 24 years, and I know some of you, Bill, I'm sure, will have something like that to share. Child Protection has grown. It's matured. It's become professional. You know, there were all those days when we just went instinctively and tried different things. But now we know, we've learned from each other, we've documented that. So really, it's a pleasure, and all of you sitting here and this annual meeting is a proof of that. So what we need to do is what we said. We need to cross-learn, we need to learn from each other, and I think this week is a good opportunity, and learning what works, and so that we don't have to reinvent the wheel, but also new approaches, because some of you have tried it and proven that it works. These are challenging times. Resources are scarce. Conflicts keep increasing. Humanitarian situations increase. So the more we can learn from each other, I think we will be more efficient. So we need more solidarity. We need to stand with each other for the children. I think that's very important.
Thank you very much, Shima. A lot of gold in there. Just for the sake of time, I'll move swiftly to ask a question to Bill. Bill, the climate change issue has become the biggest driver and increase in humanitarian crises recently, with extreme weather events now 8 times more frequent than 20 years ago. Again, one of those numbers that is just a number, but it's very significant. Around 1 billion children are at high risk of being affected by climate crisis. Now, not even mentioning the impact that climate crisis has on other types of crises, like armed violence and armed conflict. Please share with us World Vision's experience of what you're witnessing on the ground and how this is impacting children's well-being and protection.
How's that? Yeah. Thank you, Hani, and thank you, Shima, for those really wise words. Yeah, what we're seeing on the ground is what you all are seeing on the ground as well, is that climate-induced crises, the impacts of climate-induced crises, like other humanitarian crises, fall most squarely and deeply on children. And while the connection between climate change and child protection issues is not always clear to everyone and is certainly often overlooked by the media and by politicians, we are seeing very significant increases caused by climate change of many forms of violence against children. And I'm sure you can all say the same, affirm that. Of course, much of this comes down to the economic disruption and the corresponding stress that households and communities are feeling. And we know from humanitarian situations for decades, and at the local level, even at the national level, and even at the global level, when we think about the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic, that when households come under increasing stress and livelihoods pressures and loss of income, we see increases in physical violence, emotional violence, and sexual violence against children. And we're seeing that all over the world these days. We're also seeing dramatic increases in negative coping mechanisms as the families and the caregivers try to navigate this loss of assets, loss of income-generating opportunities, often dislocation due to conflict and other climate-induced challenges, disruption in schooling. These are all drivers, as we know, of negative coping mechanisms like child marriage and child labor, and we're seeing increases around the world in those coping mechanisms. And also, a heartbreaking thing that we're seeing is that the negative impacts of some forms of violence are aggravated by climate change. For example, child marriage. I was in the south of Ethiopia a few months ago, the southern part of Ethiopia, in a terrible climate change-induced famine and drought. Unbelievable. The worst on record, in historical record there. So many people were dying every day. So much livestock had died. And so we went to a food distribution. Then we went to an acute malnutrition feeding center where it was heartbreaking. There were babies and their mothers, or babies and their grandmothers, if their mothers had already died, that were on the edge of starvation to death. It was desperate. And when we heard from the clinic, the leader of that clinic, that acute malnutrition feeding center, she spoke to us. And we were not a child protection delegation. This was just a humanitarian response delegation, just learning. She said to us, without any solicitation, if we want to stop acute malnutrition, the worst ways that this climate-induced famine is impacting people, if we want to stop that, we need to stop child marriage and teenage pregnancy. And that was unsolicited. She made that connection. She said that the people who end up in the worst conditions are the young mothers whose bodies cannot sustain themselves in these conditions and cannot help the babies develop. And that was very moving to me. Also, as we listen to children around the world, children make this connection all the time between the anxiety and the stress that climate change is causing them. The majority of children, as we know in every global survey, talk about climate-induced stress and anxiety, but they also make the connections to forms of violence. We did a recent survey in the Middle East of Syria, Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, and in that context, children shared a lot about anxiety and sadness and feel of loss of control of their future, but also they talked about increases in physical violence and not feeling safe. And the majority of children made that connection themselves to increases of violence in the home, in the community, and practices like child marriage and child labor. Also, if we look at the general comment number 26, on the Convention of the Rights of the Child, which was focused on child rights and the environment, we saw the input that children gave to the drafting of that general comment often made that connection as well, which was remarkable. So really, child protection has to be part of the climate change agenda. It really does. In part because to any efforts that are successful in alleviating or reducing the impact of climate change will address some of the drivers of violence against children. And also, there needs to be adequate climate funding to focus in investing in prevention and response to issues like child marriage, child labor, physical violence, sexual violence, emotional violence against children, because these are direct consequences of climate crisis. So as we engage in working for climate justice as we try to address children's rights and the way that they are violated, and we try to address the most intense climate-induced vulnerabilities, we are actually echoing the sentiments of children and adolescents around the world when we hear from them. So I just want to finish by reading a quote from a child. This is from Shania, an adolescent from Tanzania. She said, "We are the least responsible for climate change, we children. But we are the most affected by its impacts, and that is not fair. Governments of all countries need to take bolder decisions and act quickly and decisively, and they need to do it now." So thank you to Shania and all the children that have helped us learn this.
Thank you very much, Bill. And thanks for, again, bringing the voice of the child back into this, which is extremely important. Riyadh, I would like to move on to ask you a question about forced displacement. As we saw, the number of forcibly displaced people has increased to 14 million, and over 40 million are children. Now, due to protracted nature of a lot of the conflicts, a majority of these children will likely not have the chance to go back and will live in displacement for a good chunk of their childhood and potentially adulthood. And this means that they face disruptions in access to education, healthcare, and social protection and other services. So children affected by forced displacement and statelessness face heightened risk of violence, neglect, abuse, exploitation. Now, you as a Syrian yourself, and as someone who has worked to alleviate the suffering of Syrian children who are displaced both inside and outside of your country, how do you see the impact of forced displacement on children?
Thank you very much for the question. Indeed, the forced displacement has been an ongoing issue in Syria for over 13 years now. Over half of the population in Syria are displaced, either internally as IDPs or externally as refugees. It is a critical issue, not only here in Latin America, but like most of the crises around the world. Now, this morning, I've learned that my children, they don't understand me when I speak during my work, which is alarming. So I want us to shift our perspectives a little bit towards children. Like, let's think about this from a child perspective. We're technical and usually tend to complicate things a little bit. So imagine that you are a child who's, without any explanation, without any preparation, had to flee your town. You've left your school, your neighborhood, your friends, your toys, your books, familiar faces and places, and had to embark on a dangerous and hard trip. This disturbance in your life would be the start of many other challenges that you will face. For a starter, you will lose your access to education, which would have a profound impact not only on your immediate learning, but also like the long-term impact on your education. And your chances of going back to school would decrease day after day if you don't have immediate access to education. On the other hand, for health services, if you usually will not have access to essential health services, which would increase the chances of malnutrition, treatable diseases, and basic injuries that will not be treated. And this would have an effect on your health longer term. In addition to that, the psychosocial impact is also severe. As many children, you would have been subject or witnessed violence, which would leave you with things that most children would not be able to express themselves without adequate PSS activities or working with people who understand the impact of forced displacement. This would leave them with long-term psychological issues like PTSD and anxiety and depression, and we're seeing this in Syria recently. moreover, the exploitation risks would be higher. They will increase. As many children, you would be subject to child labor, to child recruitment, and early marriage. So this is basically due to the breakdown of the community structure and and your family, which would make them more vulnerable to neglect and abuse. This is all assuming that you have not been separated from your family, which would open the door for a totally more complicated issues. So just to summarize, forced displacement would have a profound impact on children, especially when we're not prepared, especially when the community itself would face a sudden problem and they would need to be on the move immediately. This would put the children at risks in terms of education, healthcare, psychosocial support, or their psychological health, MHPSS risks. This is why it is super important in those settings to have children back in their routines as soon as possible, because this disruption would lead to more and more complicated issues. So this is the first thing we think about as children. What do we do every day, and how can we go back to our normal day, which would allow us to express and cope with our problems.
Thank you very much, Riyad, for that very relevant perspective and bringing us again into the shoes of children. Maybe I'll continue actually with you, Riyad. So how are local and national child protection stakeholders enhancing the existing CP systems to address new crises? More specifically, in what ways can localized and contextualized social service workforce strengthening and wider facilitation of local actors help us in this situation?
Well, every time I'm asked a question about localization, I find it very, very challenging to answer. It is one of the most agreed upon principle, yet it is the big elephant in the room. So basically, I need to convince you with something that you are already convinced with, right? Integration of local structures and local communities in the child protection services is essential. Basically, here you would be talking about acceptance of the communities, you're talking about sustainability, you're talking about access, which is something that should be the principle and the start of any of our responses to crisis. Take, for example, the child protection committees and the implementation of this during crisis. They play a critical role in monitoring and reporting child protection issues to us who usually would be working in Syria, at least cross-border, and we don't live the day-to-day struggle that people do. So integrating those local structures into our responses would make them more sustainable and more adequate and response to the real needs of the people. Furthermore, this would allow to the implementation of decentralized services. This is especially important during displacement. In Syria, we've seen that with respect to all people who are responding in Syria, but when you have a displacement wave, usually international services that are in the area would evacuate their staff and would the safety would be their first concern. And then after weeks, they would come back and look, okay, what do we do now? While when you implement such services locally and integrate them into the community, the service itself would move with the displacement wave, which like allows you to just access all the people in the most remote area or underserved area. And we've seen this a lot in Syria. Thirdly, like when you allow local actors to, and here I'm not talking only about NGOs, we have the tend to see that localization is working with local NGOs. It is not. It's working with local community. It is NGOism or NGOing the response, which is not like what we need here. So when you work with local communities, you would have a greater chance of acceptance, a greater chance of having your response respecting local norms and addressing real need and real issues that people are facing, instead of enforcing different agendas or like a program that you have tried somewhere else that doesn't really work in this setting. So this is why localization and working with local communities is super important. And for me, the main issue here, the main takeaway would be sustainability. We will not last in one setting. We will not be here forever. At one time, either when we finish the program or when the fund decreases, we need to leave. So what are we leaving those communities with is the question here.
It's a very, very good point. Many points, but particularly this last point, which I think Shima also brought up in the beginning, this idea that we leave and everything drops, right? And during COVID, I think was a very clear slap in a lot of our faces of us not being able to be there, whereas the local communities and local organizations continued providing the services that we couldn't provide. So really thinking about that element. And as you were talking, Riyad, it reminded me of once, I don't know if you remember this yourself, it was the first year or so that Huras Network had joined the steering committee of the Alliance, and we were trying to get a hold of Riyad, and for weeks we were not getting any answers to WhatsApp. And then of course he comes back after a while and he says, I was in the field evacuating people, which was a really interesting kind of reminder that a lot of those that work for larger organizations, they don't have that direct contact. It's their security people who go and evacuate. It's not every single member of the organization now mobilizes. You may be doing child protection, but now it's your job is security. Your job is to evacuate people, right? So it's that closeness with the community that gives you that the edge that then leads to sustainability of the work. Bill, on the way back to to this side of the table, how are our approaches to protecting children needing to change as a result of decreased humanitarian access and limited funding? And in responding to this, if you can specifically speak to issues of accountability and working across sectors, which are, as you know, two of the priorities of our strategy.
Let's try that. Thank you. Okay, yeah, that works. Yes, thank you, honey. You're right. We are seeing decreases and struggles with humanitarian access. As you said, even unpredictably, we think we have access and then the next day we don't, and decreases in funding for child protection and humanitarian action and actually humanitarian response overall. We're seeing significant decrease in funding. So just 3 points related to that. The first of which relates very much to what you just shared, Riyad. Thank you. We need to continue working in ways which acknowledge and are built on an acknowledgement of our dependence on local actors. Not just local CBOs, but local actors. We have to be working in a way which engages local actors, including children, including caregivers, including community-based organizations and civil society of all types, including faith-based communities, including local governments, traditional leaders. Of course, we can bring and need to bring insights and learning and best practice from externally, but we need to bring that in a way that local actors authentically are engaged as co-leaders and co-owners. That it's not about just imposing an external agenda. Because, one, just for effectiveness purposes completely, but when we have this unpredictable, dynamic contexts of conflict, and then we add on to that the unpredictability of funding, where we think we have funding and then next year we may not. We have to work in ways which acknowledge that these actions need to be locally driven and locally owned, even in our humanitarian work. And we've often used this sort of humanitarian life-saving mindset as it doesn't relate until we get into a more stable, but it's not true. The more unstable the context is, the more we have to acknowledge our local dependence, because these people may not be here tomorrow. So, or we may not be here tomorrow. There could be anything that can happen. And so we need to be working in ways which acknowledge that dependence and engage, bring the best learning, but do that in a way that engages the local actors as the leaders. Secondly, we need to be working to advocate for necessary resources. With this reduction in resources, we all need to be taking particularly the reality of the ground where you all work and where we have the privilege to be connected in our work. That needs to be brought in advocacy for the necessary resources. And this includes, of course, international organizations, national organizations, agencies advocating, but it also includes us trying to make sure that that global influencing space has and amplifies the voice of local actors and local people, including children. We have seen many examples where children's protection has been advocated for by local people in ways that are much more effective than just the same international agencies showing up and saying similar things again and again. And they advocating, of course, for adequate funding for child protection and humanitarian action, but also advocating that with donors that child protection is a central feature of every humanitarian response, because we continue to see that marginalized often. And part of those local voices need to be children. We've seen many examples, and I know you have as well, where children have been able to bring a compelling voice into this discourse. It's not that they know best and they know everything, but their reality, not only do they have a right to bring for their voices to be listened to, they do bring unique contributions to the discussion. And we've seen that particularly effective not only when it's about listening to children or consulting with children, but when decision makers are in an intergenerational dialogue, when it's an actual discussion, and where there's listening both ways and a discussion. And that's where I think the advocacy can have the most compelling kind of resonating effect with those who are funding child protection, humanitarian action. And then finally, as you mentioned, we need to see the scaling and more effective integrated multisectoral work for achieving child protection outcomes. Many donors, some of whom are represented here, are showing an increased support of multisectoral efforts to achieve child well-being or to protect children, including the protection of children. We're seeing more and more openness to including significant child protection outcomes in multisectoral integrated programming, or even in programming which is for food security or education or health, because donors are realizing, and we all are seeing, that child protection plays a critical role in achieving those outcomes themselves. Education outcomes, food security outcomes, and health outcomes and others. And we're also seeing more and more evidence that multisectoral efforts, including child protection, are often the best way to achieve child protection outcomes as well. And so we want to see that. I think that's an important thing for us to be moving forward, rather than in competition with the other sectors, trying to get the donor attention moving forward in a more integrated way.
Thank you very much, Bill. Yeah, it's interesting that it reminds me, as you laid out the arguments about localization, about listening to children, about working with other sectors, that these are all components of our accountability to children, right? So it's important that we, even though in our strategy we have a priority on accountability, but it's so linked with everything else that we do, we can't do our work not well or do it in silos and still say that we are accountable to children, right? Yeah, sure.
And I'll try to add, there we go. One of the things that we've looked at in World Vision and been very convicted about is starting to model that more ourselves. In our own decision making, are we engaging children at the program level, at the national level, at the international level, in the sort of things that we're advocating for with governments? And we've seen really remarkable changes in that children, listening to children more intentionally in our decision making has made. And last year when I was in Lebanon, I saw just some wonderful examples of integrated work to achieve child protection outcomes and livelihoods and education outcomes together, but also asking children in a very structured way to be influencing our understanding of the reality and of the impact of those programs. So just wanted to give a shout out to what I saw in Lebanon last year, which has really struck with me as well.
Amazing. Great. Thank you so much. And Bill, you started talking a little bit about advocacy. Shima, I want to turn to you. And as you know, the goal of our strategy is on making sure that centrality of children and the protection is a key element of humanitarian action. So I wanted you to reflect on how advocacy efforts can be strengthened to prioritize children's protection in humanitarian action, including in the whole cycle of emergency preparedness, prevention, service delivery, and transition to development.
Thank you, Hani. I think, 3 points here. But first of all, Bill, you said that as well. It's about children's advocacy for themselves. And we heard that from our keynote speaker today. How powerful was that, right? So if we really listen to children today, they're going to tell us what works for themselves and what doesn't work. There were times, not so long ago, when UNICEF actually, in our country programs, we would have a program that worked with children and young people and, trying to get their voices to be heard. And that has actually diminished now because children do it for themselves, right? So like our keynote speaker, she was magnificent in the way she actually told us off a bit as well, right? I mean, that's great. And more, I think to me, that's the most important part. To listen to children and, like you said, meaningfully, really what they want to say, not that let's have them at the back of the room kind of thing, but actually listen to them from where they're speaking about what impacts them. And I'll give you a very quick example. Last year, when I was still in Iraq, early last year, we'd organized at the beginning of the year panel discussion, somewhat like this, with our partners. And looking at who were those influences in the country that worked on themes that had an impact on children. So climate, conflict, and all of that. And gender. And we had the Canadian ambassador focused on gender because of, their priorities in Iraq. And with me, the co-host was a 14-year-old. And at one point, the Canadian ambassador actually turned around and said to her, you know what? You were my biggest advocate because you were at a certain meeting when we were discussing budgets for education with the Ministry of Education. He said, and I put my talking points away because of everything you said to the Minister of Education. And that's how powerful it is. So really, I think first is children's advocacy for themselves. Extremely important. We've learned it. UNICEF's actually embraced it. And, it's so easy now because kids have smartphones. They have access to all kinds of technology better than we do. Sometimes they know it better. So I think it's great. You hear a 16-year-old in Cameroon speaking about conflict and advocating. And you think, well, I'm sitting here, but you get to hear what she's saying. So we've got many examples like that, and I think that's really important. Bill, what you said, it just resonates with that. Second thing is, and often, in all these years in UNICEF, I've had other agency colleagues say to me, you guys are very lucky. Your mandate is on children. Everyone likes children. Everybody cares about children. And I think that really is the second point, the unifying power of children as a reflection of the society. Everybody wants to see children's well-being happen. And we actually see you can build coalition across opposing parties just on children. And that's been great. And that's another focus for the advocacy, right? So as we just heard from Riyadh as well, you know, whether it's these rural communities or communities that were most impacted, or whether we are talking to governments, as UNICEF often does, we actually can bring them together. And then in my current role at the UN Security Council working groups, when we hear, everybody's concerned about children. So I think that's another powerful one. And often when, you know, you've got all these opposing parties, all these people conflicting, but they do agree on children and their well-being. Not always, often. That's also true. And you can see that when you're negotiating peace agreements or for transitional justice, recovery plans, all of that, people do kind of settle when it's on children. I have never had someone tell me, children are not important, you can speak later. So I think that's... And then finally, I think, you know, we've all talked about this, Riyadh, you, Bill, myself, Hani, you also, about resources and how stretched they're becoming. And under such circumstances, I think for us, what's become very important is just the argument that what works for children works for the entire community. But the converse is not true. What works for, you know, if you have programs which are designed for overall community and the adult population, doesn't necessarily work for children. So I think those are very powerful arguments. In many ways, our work has been made easier by children.
Amazing. Thank you so much for those reflections. I'll just pick up on this element that I feel like what you're suggesting, and I think it's very true, and whenever it happens, magic happens, is when we just step away and allow for children. So rather than kind of thinking about children advocating for themselves is something that we have to do, sometimes it's just us creating the space and or emptying the space so they step up and do their work because they know how to do it, right? As you said, the Taisa, the Brazilian girl, I mean, how powerful was that? And we also have a young lady here from Ukraine who we'll hear from at a later stage. Great, so I'll just, for the sake of time, I want to do a quick final round with all of you guys. And I want to start with you, Bill, but the question is the same with all of you. So if you can, in 1.5 minutes, make us a bit more hopeful going forward, because I feel like a lot of what we have talked about is very heavy and it can drag you down. And then as we set the tone for the week, we also want to be encouraging of looking at the success that we have had and look at the solutions that we have found, and kind of have this kind of more encouraging, forward-looking tone to the rest of the week. So if you can, either from your experiences, your examples that you have, or from things that you know about the sector, just give us a bit of hope and let us have the rest of the week be a very positive thinking week of reflection.
Yeah, okay, a minute to give hope. There's a lot of things which inspire me and give me hope and have kept me going for the last 25 years. One of them, a more recent trend that gives me a lot of hope, is seeing in the child protection humanitarian action work an increasing focus on in working with an ecological approach, even in humanitarian response, to recognize the recognition by some donors and some international and national actors that there is actually a child protection system in place in every circumstance, even the most dire, even children on the move. If there was not, even more children would be dying or being seriously harmed. Something is protecting children. Of course, that system and that environment has been harmed and weakened by conflict and climate and other crises, but recognizing the local assets are still there protecting many of these children from what could be even worse in this terrible situation. And I'm just seeing a trend in some actors and some donors to say, this is our starting point. It's not just this external imposition, gets back to the localization, external imposition of best practices so that we can help make you protect your children. It's recognizing we have some things that we can bring, but we bring them in a way which strengthens local assets. And when I've seen that, again, back to that Lebanon example, and I've seen in these very distressed communities, families themselves, and then of course communities and neighbors and civil society and even local government beginning to move forward based on their own assets, and that the interventions were supporting that and strengthening that. That's very encouraging to me. It gives me a lot of hope and makes me interested in continuing this work. But second, most importantly, I think for me, in terms of giving me hope, and I hope it will also share a bit to you, is the hope that comes from honoring the child protection and humanitarian action workers themselves. The entire sector, all of it, stands and falls around your work every day. And I am just so inspired by the courage, the commitment, the capabilities, and the decisions that have to be made every day by people on the front lines, by people who are doing this work every day, showing up in what are often depressing circumstances or really overwhelming, still showing up, trying to bring and strengthen healing, hope, and protection of children. That's what gives me hope and gives me inspiration to continue moving forward. So I certainly, in response to that question, the first thing that comes to mind is honoring those who are doing the work in heroic ways around the world in such difficult circumstances.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that. In rapid succession, we go to Shima, and then we'll end with Riyadh.
First of all, I really have to thank Bill for saying that, because honestly, it is all of you and everyone else out there. So thank you for bringing that up. I think three things, Hani. Clearly hopeful, otherwise I wouldn't be here 24 years later. So extremely hopeful, please. So there's one thing about understanding the reality, and then on we go, right? So that's where we are. Local actors. I think, Riyadh, you talked a lot to that one, and I think that's really important. We are seeing that, as you said, Riyadh, and all of you across, where you work, that increasingly local actors are actually leading and shaping the protection work that we do, right? And collectively, we share that and we learn from that, so it's really important. I've been traveling quite a bit, not as a tourist, but really to see the programs, UNICEF and its partners programs across the world. And I did go to Indonesia recently and to Ethiopia. I talked to you about Ethiopia. In Indonesia as well, I saw, where the issues are slightly different, and they seem so far away from here. But again, working with the local communities, working with the parents, getting them in, listening to the mothers, asking them, what are the issues with your children with special needs, and how can we protect them from sexual abuse, and then creating with them what that looks like. So I really think and we see it in different forms in different parts, same in Ethiopia, so everywhere, and I know each one of you have examples for that. What's been interesting for me is I've seen partnerships across our organization, so UNICEF's partnerships with its partners and all, and they've been changing. They've been, because I was away from child protection for 6 years, and then I come back and I see quite a bit of transformation, actually, where these partnerships are, closer to a bit what Riyadh described, to the people who are the most impacted in the communities. Those are the partnerships that we have, and looking at how that intergenerational thing works, because we've learned from that. And I think that's extremely important, bringing that together. We also have young people, activists, frontline workers, all, as very clear partners, because we understand the importance of them, the caregivers, the adolescents themselves. So I think that whole local actor thing, which is much bigger than, as you said, Riyadh, it's not a local NGO, but what does that mean? And I think that's one, extremely important. And seeing everybody get involved in children's well-being and child protection, I think is extremely important. The second one, Bill, you started speaking about it, I'm going to pick it up from you, is the inclusive systems, right? Child protection systems. I know when we say child protection systems, many people not in the child protection sector roll their eyes, but honestly, we have seen that when we have inclusive child protection systems. They actually are shaping the work that we do. Because one of the most important things about child protection systems are they're multisectoral. And you spoke to that earlier, Bill. Child protection system doesn't exist on its own. It actually does interact with the other systems. And we see more and more of that. And amazingly, in emergencies, we see it. Before, people used to say, we can't do it in emergencies. It's development work. But no, we do see that. We see that in humanitarian context. We see that in cross-border context, migration. So I think people in our sector, but others also, have begun to learn that inclusive child protection systems are very important. But what we must understand is they have to be intentional in enabling access for the marginalized, the invisible, the undocumented, basically to ensure that we are not leaving anyone behind. And it isn't so easy, though. You know, it does, while we have to ensure that we transform legislation, policy, the way we design the services, it is also about going back down there and transforming people's mindsets. There's a whole lot based on assumptions and bias. So it's bringing in that social norms factor as well. And I think we're doing it more and more, and we still need to do. Finally, it's prevention. Before we talk about prevention as though it's just a buzzword, or let's talk about prevention, let's put the word in there in the document. But it's much more than that. It actually has become very much part of programming. And when we look at child protection systems, we say the first part of it is about the prevention. So if we prevent, we will not have to provide all these services. So that is very important. How do you start programming from that point? And that addresses the root causes, because we need to address root causes if we want to prevent. We need to understand what the root causes of harm to children are. And again, goes back to some of them are social norms, right? Very harmful social norms and practices, beliefs, biases, behaviors. And we've learned with social behavior change becoming more professionalized, we've learned how to do that. And then to understand that information is powerful, right? And when you put information in the hands of children and adolescents and caregivers, can be super powerful, like your example, right? The person who said, no, this is what happens with child marriage. So extremely powerful if we just give them that. And finally, putting children and their protection at the center of humanitarian action, it requires, as Bill said, and I'm going to say it all over again, humanitarian professionals from all sectors, who collaborate to prevent risks and harms that affect children. And we don't have the luxury of, say, the health system or the education system, of just sitting within our system. We need to go across and beyond. We need to reach out to education, to health, to justice, all of that, just to make sure that we can actually collaborate to prevent those risks and those harms. The Child Protection Minimum Standards Pillar 4 provides concrete actions for all humanitarians, and increasingly we share these common tools to help us achieve these goals. And of course, the Alliance sets many of these aspects as priorities in its current strategy, and the progress the child protection sector has made is really tangible. So, lots of reasons to be hopeful.
Thank you very much. And I'll quickly go to Riyadh now for some additional hope. I think we have already gone.
Well, I'll try not to repeat what you've said. You've said much of what I wanted to say. But no worries. For me, I think localization is something that more and more donors are being pro of, and they are trying to change their policies, they're trying to change their procedures to align more with local actors, be more local actors friendly, which is something great. We still have a long way to go, but we're getting there. The second thing is that we're seeing like more participation from the children's sides. In Syria, we have 13, 14 years old children who are shaping the transitional justice agendas, which is like most of adults don't understand what's transitional justice, which is very, very good. The last thing is that we do have all the power here in this room. We know where to go. We have the experience. We've answered the most critical questions. It's the matter of how now, not the what. We've figured out the what with all of the work that we've done. It's the how, and we have the CPMS. You've talked about it, the backbone of the sector, which it can lead the response to any kind of crisis, right? So we don't really need to reinvent the wheel over and over again with every crisis that we face. I think those are enabling factors for us to maybe respond in a more efficient way in the future. We're gathering learnings. We're having more and more local actors in such force. 10 years ago, it was a privilege for local organizations to sit in such a room and then contribute to the standardization on the global level. Now we're pulling knowledge from the field, which is great for a more sustainable and adequate response in the future. I think this is what still keeping me in this place, saying, oh yes, there is something that we can do, and we're doing it.
Fantastic. A big round of applause for everyone. Thank you very much, Shima, Gil, and Riyadh. You guys don't go anywhere. We have a little exercise to do, but thank you very much.
Thanks
Appreciate it. Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Riyadh. Great. So apologies for being such a bad timekeeper. We're a bit over time, but we have a very short exercise for you guys to do at your table, so you don't need to move anywhere. But it almost sets kind of a baseline for what we think now about some of the questions that we presented to you in our background paper. So some of you have read through those. So I want each table, and we have tried to separate the tables with Spanish, English. So if you're a Spanish speaker in an English table, you can move to the next table that is Spanish speaker, or vice versa. If one of you can take out a phone and scan the QR code that is stuck on your table. So each table should have a QR code. So you can just scan it. So one person needs to scan it. You don't all need to scan. So a question will pop up, and the question is randomized. So your question might be different from the table next door. So if for 10 minutes you can just discuss the question and put a few thoughts into the Mentimeter that pops, the SurveyMonkey that pops up. So first discuss for a few minutes, and then put your thoughts in response to the question that you see into the survey. Is that clear? It's good? Okay. 10 minutes. Thank you. So just to clarify, you need to only discuss one question, because each time you scan, a different question will come up. So one question only. Okay, so please start putting your answer into the phone. One question only. We'll break in about 2 minutes. Okay. Just maybe, can I have your attention for 1 minute? So we are done with this part of the day. We are going to go on a break. Feel free to finish your discussion and put your answer in. We're not going to do a feedback now. We will compile everything and we'll feed it back to you guys at a later stage. But at the end of the 3 days, we will come back to all these answers that you gave as well. So once you're finished, feel free to take your break. We are coming back here at 10:45. So 30 minutes of break. Please be back in here 10:45.
Inglês. sí, 1, 2, prueba de sonido. 3, sí, 1, 2. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, prueba de sonido. 1, 2, sí. Es 3, 4. Sí.
Okay, welcome back. Please take your seats. Okay, just a housekeeping issue quickly, and that is related to the app for the conference. So some of you have already downloaded the app. The app is very useful because it's an easy way for you to have the agenda, and then we do broadcasts on the app. So if there is something that is changing, the timing changing or room changing, if you have the app, it's going to pop up on your phone, so you're going to be able to know about it quickly. And if you're not comfortable using apps, maybe ask one of your friends who has the app to tell you about the information that is being transmitted through the app. So we're in the process of printing the QR code for the app, so it will be on your table later. So if you can't find it now, a bit later you will be able to scan it from your table. Okay. Please, those in the back of the room, if you can sit down. Okay. No, we do the security thing first. Okay, so we are now going to just go through a protocol part of the meeting, which is basically a couple of security videos. One is about Panama itself. It's from the UN security system. And then one about the building, so that you know what to do in case of emergencies and what kind of things to avoid in Panama. So if you can have the videos quickly, it's about 6 minutes total, and then we'll continue.
Panamá, con una población superior a los 4 millones de habitantes, es uno de los países con mayor crecimiento y desarrollo de América Latina, manteniendo una gran estabilidad política y económica y con menor nivel de criminalidad de la región. Sin embargo, para evitar ser víctima de la delincuencia y tener una segura y agradable estadía, es recomendable tener prudencia a la hora de trasladarse por el país. En zonas turísticas hay carteristas y no es recomendable llevar grandes cantidades de dinero en efectivo, ni todas sus tarjetas de crédito, joyas u objetos de valor. No es recomendable llevar consigo todos los documentos de valor en un mismo bolso. Se recomienda portar una fotocopia del pasaporte y dejar el original en la caja fuerte del hotel o en sitio seguro en su residencia. Los delitos más comunes son el hurto, robos a casas y carteristas. En el caso de enfrentar un asalto con armas, no resista, mantenga la calma y haga sentir al delincuente que él controla la situación. Para evitar un asalto, se recomienda no caminar sin compañía por ciertas calles de noche. El cambio climático está afectando a toda la región por efectos directos como las densas lluvias y las altas temperaturas que coinciden con las dos definidas temporadas en nuestro país, temporada lluviosa que va de abril a diciembre y la seca que va de diciembre a abril, ambas con alto nivel de humedad, por lo que se deben preparar para nuestro clima tropical. Panamá cuenta con una rica flora y fauna tropical que llama a la aventura, pero hay que tener cuidado y ser precavido a la hora de hacer expediciones. Recuerde mantener actualizada su información, registro y todas sus movilizaciones dentro y fuera del país en nuestra página web www.dss.un.org. En Panamá se puede encontrar gran variedad de hoteles, tanto de cadenas internacionales como otros que reúnan los requisitos necesarios para una estadía confortable y segura. Al elegir su residencia u hotel, además se recomienda no hospedarse debajo del segundo piso y no más arriba del séptimo, ya que en la eventualidad de un incendio, el cuerpo de bomberos no está preparado para rescates en edificios altos. El tránsito en las calles canales de Panamá es un tema complicado, pero el transporte público ha mejorado sustancialmente con la puesta en marcha de la línea 1 del Metro de Panamá, que recorre la ciudad de norte a sur. Además, la flota de autobuses Metrobús está en proceso de renovación con el objetivo de incrementar la eficiencia y seguridad del usuario. Para tomar el metro y el Metrobús es necesario comprar una tarjeta y recargarla. Sobre el uso de los taxis se recomienda solicitarlos a través de la recepción del hotel, ya que pueden recomendar taxis de confianza. No se aconseja tomar taxis en la calle, ya que en muchos casos no son de uso exclusivo. En Panamá, aún no se ha implementado el uso de taxímetros. Si bien es cierto existen tarifas oficiales para determinados trayectos, el precio suele negociarse directamente con él o la taxista. En general, no se recomienda parar taxis en la calle y sí utilizar servicios de radiotaxi y o aplicaciones digitales. La respuesta de la policía suele ser adecuada en la ciudad de Panamá. Además, tienen un departamento de turismo para asistir a extranjeros, quienes pueden solicitar un traductor de forma gratuita llenando un reporte policial. Con tarjetas de crédito se puede retirar dinero de cualquier ATM. Se aconseja que antes de retirar dinero, observe a su alrededor y, si es posible, retire el dinero en una agencia bancaria, supermercado, centro comercial o en zonas bien iluminadas. Las tarjetas de crédito son ampliamente aceptadas y utilizadas en los comercios de la localidad. Sin embargo, debido a un incremento en casos reportados de clonación de tarjetas de crédito y débito, es recomendable utilizarlas con precaución y no perderlas de vista al momento de hacer el pago en cualquier establecimiento. Adicionalmente, se recomienda que revise su cuenta al menos una vez por semana. La ciudad de Panamá tiene buenos hospitales equipados con unidades de cuidados especiales. Panamá es un país hermoso y esperamos que tenga una agradable visita teniendo en cuenta los consejos brindados por la Oficina de Seguridad.
Bienvenidos al Panama Convention Center. Su seguridad es muy importante para nosotros. Contamos con el personal capacitado y los equipos necesarios para detectar y responder de forma adecuada a cualquier emergencia que se presente. Los brigadistas serán los encargados de orientarlos en su desplazamiento hacia las salidas de emergencia.
Al momento de surgir una emergencia, les agradecemos seguir las siguientes indicaciones. Mantenga la calma, evite correr, empujar o hablar en un tono de voz elevado. Ubique al brigadista más cercano a usted, quien estará debidamente identificado. Diríjase en un paso moderado al punto de evacuación y por ningún motivo regrese a su posición original.
Una vez en el punto de encuentro, verifique que las personas que le acompañaban estén allí. Notifique si alguien hace falta y espere instrucciones. Somos un recinto sostenible. Todos los desechos generados son correctamente depositados para su correcto reciclaje. Le damos una cordial bienvenida y esperamos que su experiencia sea excelente aquí en el Panama Convention Center.
Great. Thank you very much. Hope you enjoy your safe stay here in Panama. So, as we move in towards the second part of the opening session, which will be focused on LAC, I would like to invite someone who is actually responsible for us all being here. And that's Kendra Gregson, who originally gave us the idea of thinking about Panama as potentially the next annual meeting, in-person annual meeting of the Alliance. So without further ado, I hand you over to Kendra to help us orient in Panama and the region a bit more.
Welcome everyone to Panama. We're really, really happy to see you all here. And my job is to animate you or to tell you some different things that you might want to do after or before the conference. So right now, where are you? You are at the beginning of something called the Causeway. The Causeway was built just over 100 years ago. When they were digging out the Panama Canal, they needed a place to put all those rocks and dirt. And so they joined 3 islands together. So you're at the beginning of that joining of the islands. So just past, I'm going to say the mainland. And if you continue walking, so I orient myself, if you continue walking down that way, you'll get to the first island, Naus, and then there's a second and a third island. So it's a wonderful place to walk, to enjoy, and it's open to everyone. And I say that specifically because much less than 100 years ago, it was not. This was part of the canal zone. And so this was controlled by, it was the US canal zone, and so Panamanians weren't allowed here. And so you're allowed now to walk, to enjoy. If you're into exercise, I advise, or running or biking, you can rent bikes as well. That's a great run, really long run, about 4-kilometer run, or bike, that you can do early. I advise early in the morning, like 5 or 6, and you'll see lots of Panamanians and others running and walking down the canal, or down the canal zone. Also, when you're walking by, you'll see the boats and the ships going in and going down into the canal on this side. The other side, you'll have a wonderful scene of Panama itself and the skyline. But this way, you'll see all the boats and the ships going down. Now, if you're into ships, and people who know me know I'm a sailor, so I am into ships and boats and sailboats. So if you do want to see the locks in action, one, you will have to take an Uber to just past the Miraflores locks. And there you'll be able to see the ships coming out the other side. I say, yeah, you do it in the morning. So you're looking at 6:30, better 7. So then you can see them coming out. You won't be able to go into the visitor center because that's still closed, but you see them coming out the other side. And you'll also make it back here in time for the session at 8:30. So that's one thing to do. Now, other things that you might be interested in doing is shopping. So Panama is home to the largest shopping mall in Central America. And we can debate globally, is it the 29th or is it the 25th? So I'm not going to get into the debate. But if you want to go shopping, normal shopping, food shopping, then you go to Albrook Mall. It's a very short Uber ride away, so please take your Uber and you can go there. If you want to do artisanal shopping, then you would go to, or I would say, take an Uber ride to Cardenas. There's a center of artisanos in Cardenas. Again, just a short Uber drive away. Or you go down to Casco Viejo. Now, Casco Viejo was built in 1673, and it is a World Heritage Site. It also replaced the first settlement in Panama, which was burnt, ransacked by pirates. Casco Viejo is a wonderful old town. You'll have all the sort of that feeling of the old town. There is shopping, there is restaurants, there is artisanal, cobblestone streets. And also it's a place where you can get nice coffee, and you can get chocolates, and you can get rum. Remember, we are in this part of the world known for its chocolate, its coffee, and its rum. And actually here, they make something called geisha coffee. Geisha coffee is the most expensive coffee in the world. It is well known for its blend of beans and how they roast it and then how their special way to make it. So geisha coffee is something to look at. Now, That's some of the fun stuff, and I hope you really do enjoy Panama while you're here. All of these things can be done after the conference, except for the running. I think you should do that in the morning. So all of these are things that's all easily accessible after the meeting. Now, but we're not here, as we know, for all the tours and things. And we are here, and what is here? You heard the UNDSS, but just a few other tips or things. There's earthquakes in Panama weekly, right? Usually not here in this particular city, but there's an earthquake somewhere. The canal is currently affected by climate change. There's a drought in Central America. When I arrived here 4 years ago, 50 boats were going through a day. In February, it was down to 17. Ships. Now it's down to 17. It's coming back up because the rains have started. But here is a place affected by climate change. We've talked about, and the other thing that you have here, migration. And yesterday in the meeting, we talked a lot about climate change, and we also talked about migration. There's people crossing into the Darien Gap. Every day you have hundreds of people crossing the Darien Gap after having gone through a horrific journey from Colombia into the country. It's also a place where you have people from different parts of the world. It's not only from this part of the world that's traveling across the Darien Gap, but you have people coming in from Asia, from Africa, that are coming here to make the crossing going north. So I do hope you enjoy your time, but I also do remember where you are and that this country as well is affected by some of these humanitarian issues that we're facing. And without further ado, I'd like to pass the floor and the microphone to Mara. Mara is the person who wrote our background paper for this conference, which really includes some of these issues that we're talking about specific to this region, but also to the world. Again, welcome to Panama, and over to Mara.
Gracias, muchas gracias. Carolina, ¿dónde estás?
Carolina, where are you? Okay, I see you. Thank you.
Bueno,
Okay, Kendra already talked about the wonderful things we have here in Panama. Now I will talk about a lot of depressing things affecting our region. The dynamic is going to be very similar to the previous panel. I will introduce the background paper sessions regarding Latin America and the Caribbean. Again, very depressing. But our wonderful guests joining us today will tell us a lot about the responses given by different organizations to this problematic. Just a moment, please. As I said, we have a wonderful panel. We have about 35 years experience in the same panel. Here we have Maria Carolina Galindo. She's the Executive Director of Corporación Infancia y Desarrollo, CID. And she's joining us representing the AEOR Help Desk. She is going to be talking about the requests they are getting and the responses they give. We also have Deborah Greiser. She's a consultant, a researcher specialized in children and adolescents living in human mobility in Brazil, especially unaccompanied and separated children. And we have Sterlinda Vital joining us from Haiti. She's a specialist for children's rights and trainer of the Magistrates School in Haiti with a lot of experience in the country and international experience. We will first present, then we will ask questions to our colleagues here, and finally, we will have a Q&A session. Of course, We are not going to share all the problems affecting children and adolescents in lack, neither all the solutions. The idea is for this to be a brief introduction, just a presentation of the different topics to be addressed in the next few days of this annual meeting. And if you have any questions or comments, or if you would like to continue discussing the same topics addressed here, please approach us and we can continue the conversation. I'm Argentinian, so I really love to talk and debate and fight people. So please feel free if you do not agree with me. No problem.
Entonces,
Okay, so with this wonderful background paper that I drafted with a lot of help from the Alliance members, Hani, Camila, and a lot of people that appear here, what we did is that we summarized, of course. Well, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm sorry, but I will continue. Okay? This is arbitrary, and the problems affecting children and adolescents, creating child protection issues cannot be defined strictly by groups. But in order to just make the analysis a little bit easier, we divided on climate change and natural disasters, number one. And second, armed violence and gang violence. And third, forced displacement. Well, my name is Mara Gisela Luna. I am Argentinian. I live in the U.S. I'm an independent consultant for several UN agencies, national organizations, international organizations on child protection and gender violence. And just like before, feel free to approach me because I want to be able to cover everything now. We have 80 million statistics, 48,000 sources quoted in this background paper. So it's going to be difficult to give justice to all the information in this paper. So please let us know if you have any questions. Something important to mention about this region, for those of you working in different regions, is that the problems that we address in the background paper are linked and connected to structural causes and conditions in the region that I am about to describe. The first one is the great inequality in income and wealth in Latin America. We do not have a poor country, and the same is for the Caribbean. In fact, we are rich countries in terms of human and natural resources. However, there is an inequality in income and wealth, and this is huge. There is a measurement that I really like. It's depressing, but it's good to know it, from IDB. And it gauges how many generations is going to take a poor person in our country to get out of poverty. In Colombia, it's 11 generations. In my country, 4 generations. In Brazil, it's about 8 generations. So what does that mean, and why is that important to us? Because the children and adolescents that are being affected by humanitarian crisis are not, well, this is not the first humanitarian crisis. And sometimes the only thing they know is poverty. They don't see a way out. When we talk about displaced people, it's not that they are running away from poverty. They are running away from the impossibility of running away from poverty. You know that. You know that this is real. The second main problem that we have here, and unfortunately we all share, is the patriarchal system and gender inequality. This is huge, and this is something that we can see in violence against girls and violence against women. And the most extreme reflection of gender inequality and the patriarchal culture is the feminicide. And this is the continuation of gender violence that many children, women, and LGBTQ plus are exposed to. We know this because of the work we do. And the third aspect I'd like to highlight is that due to the intersectional and colonial character of our stories, usually the inequalities that I just mentioned are affecting some cultures and ethnic groups more than others. For those of you that are not from this region, there are specific groups that are marginalized. First, I believe that there are about 422 native groups and Afro-descendant groups. And the fact that some governments are not recognizing Afro-descendant or indigenous groups does not mean that they do not exist. Many times they are being marginalized. And to that, we add other ethnic groups that you know from your countries. For example, mestizos and people living with disabilities that many times societies are not adapted for them to live a full life. And LGBTQ plus people. So this is the context that we work in. And the three problems that I just mentioned, you can read it in the paper. First, violence. Thanks to this paper and a lot of research, we know that there is a worsening of the safety and security situation in Latin America, especially for the influence of the maras and the criminal organizations and armed groups. Many times, this deterioration sometimes is handled by the government. So instead of creating social policies for the youth to not feel attracted to join any gangs or maras, well, we have police officers, and this is the criminalization of poverty, as we call it. The second aspect is the climate injustice. As it was well explained, this is a highly exposed region to natural disasters. In fact, this is the second most exposed region to the consequences of climate change and the environmental degradation by our own extractivists and development systems. We destroy the environment in order to develop our own economies, and this is the methodology that most of our governments implemented since we have existed. So for the last maybe 200 years, and now we are seeing the consequences of all these. And finally, we have forced displacement. I will not give you statistics because you all know that 7.7 million of Venezuelans people, this is the highest displacement crisis in the world, and many of them need humanitarian assistance. However, I do want to mention that we do not have enough evidence, especially for displacement crisis in Latin America. For example, the internal displacement crisis in general is concealed, is forgotten. Some countries do not have a real statistics or how many people are internally displaced, their own citizens. And what UNICEF says with ODI in 2023 and on the last LACRO research on this year's displacement is that we need to have much more evidence on protection for those countries that are not Mexico and Colombia, where we have the most amount of evidence. We also need more evidence on the Caribbean routes. If you want to do the research and you want to bring funds into that, we would appreciate it. Because yes, it is true, we do not have that much evidence. There are some other elements where we still need more evidence. We can talk about it later on. And now let's move to our wonderful panelists. They will explain a little bit more about the work they do. Maria Carolina, first. We'd like to know what type of requests or consultations you are receiving in the AOR Help Desk for Latin America in Spanish, and how are you responding to those requests? Good morning, everyone. Just like Mara stated, my name is Carolina Perdomo. I am part of Infancia y Desarrollo. We are a local Colombian organization leading the Spanish help desk for Latin America. for child protection. This table is part of the global responsibility area on child protection. We have an Arabic and French table. And for Latin America, we have the opportunity to have this table in Spanish. Now, I will quickly share about the help desk. This is an information point, or this is a help desk on how to manage the knowledge in order to provide responses to different concerns and technical needs that organizations in Latin America have related to child protection. The minimum standards, the guidelines for the sectorial work, also the toolkit that we use in the Alliance, for example. These are information sources, or this is the repository that we have, and you can go into that repository depending on the situation and depending on the context as well. So that's what we do from the Spanish help desk. And what are the requests or consultations that we get from organizations? Well, it varies depending on the humanitarian structure and architecture in each one of the countries. So even though we have a technical information repository that's very important and rich, it also depends on the scope of each one of the countries. The thematics are related to updating the content, protocols, tools, different tools and actions that will allow for innovation in the practices from the different countries as far as their responses for child protection. Also, related to the humanitarian aid structure, we have an example. We have received a recent request. In Honduras, for example, there is a restructuring of the humanitarian structure. They are closing the clusters and becoming sectorial groups in order to potentiate the institutional capacity, the state capacity. And what do we do? Well, this is an experience that we've had in other countries, and this is the first time recently that it's happening in Latin America. So what we do is that in a technical manner, we give them the documents so Hondurans can continue the protocols and the route in order to carry out the actions. We also offer support and accompaniment based on the previous experiences and the lessons learned in different territories and different countries, so it can be tailored to the Honduras territory. This is an experience that we had a while ago in Ecuador. And Ecuador works in different sectorial groups. So we are offering the support and going through the process so they are not disconnected and the actions carried out for child protection are not ignored. Those are some of the challenges that organizations in Latin America face sometimes. Do you have challenges to answer to those matters? How do you respond? Good question. Well, there is a wealth of experience from global responsibility on child protection. As I said, we have a repository that is available for us to respond and provide answers to their needs. We want to be effective with our responses, but we face many more challenges. Number one, many of the documents are still just in English, so we need to bring it down to the characteristics that we have in LAC. Sometimes that is a little bit difficult. So what we have done in the different actions carried out is that we translate the documents, we give it some context based on the region, so we can bring it closer to the needs of those organizations. I believe that's one of the main challenges. Another challenge is the staff turnover that limits the actions and Sometimes we have to restart.
A engranar una estructura, unas acciones
We need to
y que ya se venían desarrollando.
we need to go back to the structures that existed. And we have another challenge. The visibility of emergencies in Latin America and the Caribbean. It is important to continue bringing everything to the table in a global context, because this is limiting the funding for all organizations working in LAC. It is important to potentiate community organizations, local organizations, considering the localization aspect. This is important. As agencies and international organizations, it is important to put the Latin America emergency in a global context, allowing us again to have funding resources for their needs. Thank you, Carolina. And for those of you who do not know, Carolina participated in a workshop about localization, and you can find it in the Alliance YouTube. If you would like to get to know a little bit more in details, please go to the YouTube channel. Deborah, we know, thanks to the paper and evidence, that Latin America has one of the largest crises on children and adolescent migration. We have 7.7 million Venezuelans people in the region that had to leave the country, and a great amount of these people are children and adolescents. So if you could please tell us a little bit more about the situation in Brazil. Good morning. I would like to congratulate the panelists and all the participants in this event. Thank you for inviting me to participate in the plenary. Well, just like Mara mentioned, I am Brazilian. I work with child protection, and I've been doing so for a few years, especially for migrant and refugees children since 2015. Also worked with UN organizations like UNICEF, IOM, and I also worked in civil society with children's protection. I would like to share that in 2023, Brazil became the third country in Latin America with the highest number of migrant and refugees Venezuelans. And the study found in the atlas developed by NEPO, this is a research unit working on demographics and populations. We can identify 3 migration waves from Venezuelans. The first one, people that are highly qualified, that entered through Barulhos port in Sao Paulo between 2013 and 2014. And they chose Brazil due to the restrictions imposed by other countries, for example, the US and Spain. And for this group of people, Brazil was not always the first option. And many times, Brazil is sometimes only a transit country. This happened between 2013 and 14. Since 2015, we have seen a greater influx of Venezuelan migration, and this is the second wave. We are talking about people with better life conditions. We have a lot of teachers and engineers, but some of them arrived by land, by Coraima. This is a state in Brazil that borders with Venezuela. And in this composition, we noticed a lot of men accompanied by their families. And we also received indigenous people. On this second wave, we had a lot of people from Guarao and other groups of indigenous people. And the other wave in Brazil started in 2018 when the situation in Venezuela was getting even more complex. So there is a migrant movement with less financial means. We have whole families, indigenous and non-indigenous, and unaccompanied, separated, and undocumented children. These children started to get to Brazil after 2018. And with these, the Brazilian government and international organizations and CSO started a number of responsibilities due to the change of the profile of the group of people that were coming in. We started to receive the people. Since 2018 in Brazil, we have the host operation or the welcome operation. And this is an operation from the federal government with the support from the Brazilian army and organizations, international organizations like Doctors Without Borders, the Red Cross, UN organizations, and the CSO, working all together, welcoming migrants and Venezuelan refugees. The data is being updated constantly. Just like Mara said, we have more than 7 million migrants and refugees coming from Venezuela. We have about 510,000 migrants and Venezuelan refugees living in Brazil. From this number, 35 to 40% of them are children and adolescents. Therefore, we also have shelters for the Venezuelan population. Nowadays, we have 8,000 people living in the federal government shelters and UNHCR. We have 10 shelters to work with Venezuelans. If you see the situation, you know that there are a lot of shelters because of the rain situation or the flood situation in the south of Brazil. This is a recent situation. Now, going back to the migration situation of children, most of the children coming into Brazil come accompanied by their parents. Then we have separated children and unaccompanied children. We have statistics from UNHCR, UNICEF, IOM, and the government. We have the ombudsman, and they interview children usually crossing the border.
Thank you, Deborah. I was going through what you were stating.
From Haiti. My question for you is, we get all of those extremely negative news from Haiti and the violence, the increased violence in Port-au-Prince. But we also know that Haitians are an extremely resilient, innovative people. And so the question is, could you please tell us more about the situation of security and what are the responses that organizations are giving, like yourself, when it comes to children associated with armed forces or armed gangs, sorry.
Thank you everyone. Thank you to the Alliance for having me. And please allow me to have a special thought for all children suffering around the world, and especially those in my country who are suffering and enduring plight because of armed gang violence. As you may know it, for the last decade, Haiti has been facing political instability and gang armed violence. And for more recently, the threshold of armed violence has been skyrocketed. And those gangs, they have grown in power because they have some complex ties in the field with political and economic elites, as well with the transnational organized crime groups in the Caribbean and Latin America. And children are paying the heavy price of those gang violence. And the gangs are exercising territorial control. I will speak about the overall control. For example, in the capital, 80% of the capital is controlled by gang, but there are they are also exercising a more exclusive control on their sanctuaries, what I would consider as enclaves, where state cannot or is not eager to penetrate. So those children, we don't have enough information about them. And those gangs are also live streaming their activities, their criminal wrongdoings, as well as their arms supplies, to really exercise a sheer terror over the population. So those children, the violations committed by gangs in the situation of armed violence in Haiti are similar to those which are being committed in situation of armed conflict, because gangs are attacking hospitals, school. They have set ablaze some schools, depriving children from education. They are attacking they are also deny humanitarian access. UNICEF container has been loaded, depriving more than 50,000 children from receiving critical aid, humanitarian aid. They have also abducted children, they are killing children, and they are also recruiting children. We have observed that there are a decreasing of children in the street. The former street children have been recruited by the gangs, and we don't have access to those children. So the grip of the gangs over this territory is so strong, and they are instilling their principles into those children. And the recent report, study made by UNICEF, which is yet to be published, has demonstrated that those children are looking up to those gangs. They are admiring those gangs because they are instilling, they are ingraining their principles into those children. So now, and we don't have national policies regarding the association of children with those gangs. We don't have a national narrative prohibiting the recruitment of children by gangs. And we also don't have a national referral program for the rehabilitation of those children. And now, how do we protect children in those situations? Taking into account that we don't have the monitoring and reporting mechanism as we have it in situation of armed conflict. As you know it, after following the groundbreaking research of Graça Machel in 1996, from the resolution 1261 to the latest resolution of 2601, so the Security Council has put in place a monitoring and reporting mechanism which enable child protection specialists to monitor, to gather accurate, reliable information, and we don't have that in situation of armed violence. So we don't have first-hand and disaggregated data on children associated or affected by armed violence. So I believe that as child protection specialists, we have to strive to develop a comprehensive, coherent mechanism that will enable us to really intervene for those children in a timely manner. So as action, what we are trying to do, as we don't have any access to those children associated with armed groups, we have access to children formerly associated with armed groups which are currently detained in children facility detention center. So we are advocating with the national juvenile judges to see if they can expedite those cases. But I have to let you know that since 2018, the juvenile court has been dysfunctional because it is located in an excluded area. So we've been advocating with the president of the tribunal to have a new space for this tribunal to be functional. But still, the gangs have attacked about 6 tribunals, and some judges have fled the country, making it very difficult for the system to take into account those cases. And we also working in the prevention. We have launched some campaign against the use of children by armed gangs, and we have reached about 25,000 people. So we are trying in this, and we are also advocating with the national stakeholders to see if they can set new provisions in the law, in the framework, because we have a national framework that has foreseen the use of children by armed forces. But even though those actions are frowned upon, but the law hasn't foreseen the sections. So even though Haiti has ratified the ILO Convention 138 and 182, but still there are some missing. There are lack of proper national legal framework to really counter these perpetrators. So this is globally what we are doing.
Okay, thank you very much for sharing so much detail on the context and your actions. And now, if we still have time, si todavía hay tiempo, vamos a hacer el...
If we still have time, we're going to do the Q&A. Camilla? We have 10 minutes to respond to any questions. Please, the microphones are where? Somewhere. If anybody wants to ask a question, please raise your hand and they will take the microphone to you. Good morning. Well, the question that I have for you is for Deborah. It's a pleasure, Vladimir, from UNICEF for Panama. And in the things that you were telling us about, I was finding a common point in regards to the care for children that are not accompanied, those who are by themselves without documents, those that have been separated. And part of the work that I do here in Panama is I have to be here in regards to what has to do with identification, registry, and care of these children. The case of these children that go through Darien, I would like to know a little which have been the challenges in regards to the care for these children that are not accompanied, separated in Brazil. Are these children that are in transit? Are these children that are only from Venezuela? Or have you identified other nationalities? And what has the experience been in regards to strengthening the systems of protection in the government? Please tell me about that. Thank you for that. Well, something that I have also learned with my investigation and the work that I have done with organization of civil society and UN, in protection of migrants, it's very important to work together. In Brazil, we have a work alongside with the government, UN, civil society, and something that is very important is the services. We also have the specialized services in Brazil. We have two services that are good practices of Brazil. I'm going to talk about one first that's called Sencaste. Sencaste is in Portuguese. I'm not sure how to say that. But Sencaste, it's a service for protection and care of children whom are migrants, refugees, and children that have been victims. And this service started by the tribunal in Sao Paulo. There are specialists. This is for child trafficking. They have attorneys, psychologists, people from social services that do a joint work. And then in Venezuela, it was called Palona. And everybody, all the children that qualify for these programs, the service started in Sao Paulo back in the year 2015 with Ruiz, who works in the tribunal, Paulo Farigas. He started this work. It started back in 2015 for children coming from Haiti because there was a child that was coming from Haiti and children that are not accompanied from Africa, like Angola. So this service is in Sao Paulo, first of all, because we have children that were coming from Guarulhos. And then after that, in Roraima, which is close, we have a project of protection for children that are not accompanied, separated, non-documented from UNICEF with ABSI Brazil. And there's a multi-professional group, attorneys, psychologists, people of social services that give support to the children from the time that they come into Brazil for the border, where they have the police, the different agencies of UN, and the Operation Acogida. Then we have the identification with the children towards all the services, migration, vaccination, and the child that is not accompanied, and it's very important also to talk to the different tribunal for children and the council, and also that the institution for childhood, which is an area where we host these children. So one of the things, it's a shelter. So we have this work in the with protection alongside with justice, with international organization, with civil society. Since you spoke about that, Ying, one of the things that I would like to share with you is something that they spoke about this morning. Many times these children and adolescents that are vulnerable at the borders. They're scared of talking about what they feel, what are their stories. And one of the strategies that was used in Brazil was drawings, especially with the children, indigenous children, because many times they don't speak Spanish. And since they only speak their mother tongue, it's important to have papers, pencils that they can draw, because many times that through a drawing, we can find out what is happening with the child, if they're suffering, if they have depression. And this is a very appropriate language, not only talking, because they're also very fearful when they go to interviews and they're by themselves. So the situation of the language of Portuguese, this is not so common, and many of them do not speak. And the translation, the supporting team is very important in Brazil. The important is to do advocacy, to defend the children. It's very important independently, no matter their migratory status, where they're coming from, that all of them will have access to the law, and also in the public policies emphasizing on this. So just to share with you another problem that we also have in other countries is information, data. We have different data. So the sources help us to investigate. So we have data from UN, we have data from the government, we have investigative groups, and also sometimes we have problems with the age, a cutoff based upon the age. So the International Convention and another one up to 12, depending on the legislation up to the age of 12. Some their children after 12, after 8, or sometimes they're considered adolescents. And sometimes they cut off at the age of 15. And this is so having this idea for the adolescents that starting doing this work in ILO, then we start doing investigation. The numbers are always very complicated. So thank you for sharing your experience with me. Just a little comment. Brazil has protection, which is very important for those who are not from the region. It was the first one that had, in 1994, they have a law of protection called ECA. It's a leader of the things that have to do of how to apply it. We already know the gap between law and reality and so forth, but there's an institutionality, something that is different in each of the Latin American countries. So I just wanted to go ahead and add this. So it's very important. Something about Brazil is that we have the federal constitution from 1988 that already spoke about the integral protection of children. Then we have the International Convention for Children in 1999 after the National Convention. After this, we had the children and adolescents that have to do with this. So we have advance in the legislation, the statutes, and many occasions, so many things happen with the children when they're at the border or when they need support from justice. So that's that. Well, I will really like to say thank you. There's no more time for questions because we all want to go and eat. I think so.
That would be nice. You can still eat. The cafe guys are very flexible. No, I think we'll have lots more time for questions in the corridors. And we're going to do an exercise in the minute to find out who you can use to communicate if you're not bilingual. But I think we do need to try and stick to time. So sadly, we're going to not come to your question, but I hope you'll forgive me. We're going to move, well, let me first thank you. So I'd like to say thanks to Celinda, Maria Carolina, Brenda and Mara for that excellent, excellent session. It was a fascinating background paper, beautifully written and a really engaging panel. We're now going to take a minute for an engagement activity. We're going to invite our marketplace stall holders to go outside and set up their stalls if they haven't already. For those who have, they can stay in here with the rest of you for an activity that will be facilitated by Joanna Wedge, co-lead of our minimum standards working group, and Brenda, I believe, is staying on stage for this. And I'm going to get you a microphone. Oh, you've got one. Excellent. Thank you.
Good day, everybody. We'll just give a minute for our colleagues who are heading off to set up their stalls, and that's our next main activity. As Camilla said, my name is Joanna Wedge. Most of you know me, if you know me at all, as one half of the Child Protection Minimum Standards team, the global team at the Alliance. And I've been asked to just help us do a little bit of networking. We have a formal to have that through the 3 days. So I think this one we can call the semi-formal.